Good morning, everyone. As you can make out, this is the curtain raiser session by the number of people sitting in this hall. But my experience of the last 5 years has been that India Retail Forum starts off quite early compared to the fact that we are sitting in Powai and not somewhere in the central part of Bombay. But thank you all for coming in, and whoever can hear my voice outside this room, please start trudging in, because I have always felt that this session, while it is called the curtain raiser, it does a fantastic job of giving a perspective to what you are going to witness in the Indian and the world retail industry as we go along. So for those who are new to India Retail Forum, can I, by the raise of hands, who's here for the first time? Wow, that means Amitabh's business is doing well. You've got many first comers here. But for those of you who are attending for the first time, India Retail Forum, I have witnessed it over the last 5 years, and this happens to be the 11th year of the India Retail Forum, so it's the start of a new decade for them. But the next 2 days for you will be, I think, a game-changing proposition, because this is where I have seen the tagline of India Retail Forum comes true, which is the retail catalyst. It brings together people from across the entire value chain of Indian retail industry, actually world retail industry. And it allows you to exchange ideas like nowhere else. So in fact, I was telling Amitabh, if you're a retailer or even remotely related to retail, and if you're not here, either you're not into retail or you're stupid. So whoever is here is obviously smart, because you cannot afford to miss these 2 days. When I was discussing with Amitabh about the theme of this, and this is one of the reasons I like Amitabh and what Images does, is have an extremely positive outlook towards things and always looks at opportunities in adversity. So while the world is looking at online retail as the next big destructor of value of how retail was known across the world, Amitabh felt this was his way of looking at a huge opportunity. He calls it, or rather he's named the theme as the retail renaissance. He feels that the golden age of retail is yet to begin in India. And to that effect, the amazing way that technology has started to come into retail, and I have seen that them coming in as participants, as discussants in these 2 days, you will be amazed at how India Retail Forum manages to metamorphosize itself by taking the positive cues and looking at how we can turn a tough situation into a bigger opportunity. So welcome to all of you to India Retail Forum. Just some housekeeping tips. We want to be extremely active on Twitter, so the hashtag is IRF 2014. So if anybody is tweeting, I would urge you to please use hashtag IRF 2014. It will help us to collate your comments, and we'll be putting up all the Twitter comments on the board as well. To kick off the curtain raiser session, we have two extremely important speakers. One of them I have had the pleasure to see him before and listen to his insights. And the other person I've just met, and I'm sure you will get very interesting insights into the concept of omni-retail as far as that is concerned. These are consultants, and they have a distant view, which is always important. You guys are all into retail, so you may sometimes lose the perspective. So it's important to get a consulting view. And let me welcome Abhik Singhi, Senior Partner and Director of the BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, on stage. Abhik has been a regular speaker here, and I've learned a lot personally, and I'm sure you guys will. His presentations are extremely lucid, simple, and communicative, so lots of good insights. Abhik, thank you for coming in. Good morning. Welcome to IRF 2014 again. And I also have the pleasure to invite Devashish Mukherjee, partner of A.T. Kearney, who will speak on omni-channel retail, what's in store for future. Devashish, thanks so much for coming in. I'll leave the stage to the two of you. I know it's a curtain raiser. You can clap a little harder so that they feel that everybody's up and awake. Guys, I'll invite Abhik first to give his presentation. So the format is they both will give their respective presentations, and we'll do a short Q&A at the end of it if time permits. Abhik, over to you.
Perfect. Yeah. Can I have the presentation, please? The advantage of going first is the fact that you know that the audience is probably somewhat awake, unlike in a post-lunch session. The disadvantage is you look at some people, but you see many empty chairs, and I'm sure this situation is going to change in the next 30 minutes. So what I'm going to talk about today is key trends in retail. One of the things that one always learns in presentation is, budget about 2 to 3 minutes per slide. I have about 20 minutes, but I could not really decide which slides to take off. So I'm going to spend less time per slide, but actually go through three key consumer trends which I think are going to change the shape of retail in India over the course of the next few years. Some of these have already started happening, some of these have been around for years, but what is interesting is how do they all come together. So the first part, and I have talked about it in IRF in the past, so let me start off with the first slide. So if we compare as to what's happening in the world, typically there is a lot of focus of what's happened in the last quarter, what's happened in the last year. It's sometimes useful to take a somewhat longer perspective, and this is what has happened over the last 50 years. If you think about an average Indian, the average Indian today consumes nearly 20 times more than what a person who was born 50 years back. So you actually have a situation where there is massive consumption, and this is not inflation. So this is actually inflation adjusted. So this is real increase in consumption over the last 50 years. I've talked about this, and what this means is if you look at Indian retail, it is going to be close to $1.2 trillion by 2020. These are old news. What's new? The three new trends which I'm going to talk about, the first is around digital, the second is around word of mouth, and the third is a phenomena which I call want all. How many people in the room actually used internet 15 years back? A few hands. 10 years back. How many people used internet on their mobile 10 years back? 5 years back? 1 year back? So the big change which is happening in terms of digital is just its ubiquity. I have the details around each one of them, but let me not bore you with each of the slides. Some facts, close to 75% of internet-able devices today in India are mobile. So there is a 75% chance that when you are accessing something on the net, you're accessing it on the mobile. The big news is, going forward, you may actually not access it on the internet, but you may actually do it through your app. Number two, which is a surprising piece, is more number of people in rural are mobile internet than urban. So 70% in rural, 40% in urban. When we all think about who is the person who's online, this is people we think about. College students, employed youth, businessmen, people like you and us who are sitting in the room. We did a study last year which looked at the internet usage habit of close to 25,000 people across India. And what you found was the fact that yes, there are affluent people who are online, people in metro are online, young people are online, but you actually have disproportionately higher share of non-affluent, rural, and not so young people also being online, mobile, internet savvy to a much greater extent than what would have been imagined. The next piece is what really determines digital behavior. And if there is one fact, one slide that you take away from this presentation, I would urge you to look at this slide. The question is, what really differentiates behavior? Does a woman behave the same as a man? Does the metro consumer behave the same as a rural consumer? None of it is actually as good a predictor of online behavior except digital age. Digital age is the number of months or years that a person has been online. So a 32-year-old woman staying in Saharanpur, if she has been online for 18 months, is going to have more in common with a 20-year-old boy who's in Mumbai, who's also been online for 18 months, rather than somebody who has the same demographic. So the single most important characteristic that defines digital behavior is digital age, or how long have you been online. Demographics, psychographics, they are not as relevant or important. So that's one thing that I would ask each of you to keep in mind as implications come forward. Commerce is one part of it, but internet is much more than that. This is again one part of that study, which is to say, what is digital influence? And across a bunch of categories, it's not only about commerce, but also about the influence which is there. So for example, if you look at cars or airlines, the digital influence index is overall high, but for very different reasons. And do you as retailers understand, for the categories that you are present in, what implication does this have is very important. So we were just having a discussion in terms of what is the sustainability of the online commerce. Will people actually make money? And this is one reason why I believe that there could be some light at the end of the tunnel. Close to 1/3 of the people actually buy stuff online because it's cheaper, because it's discounted. But close to 1/3 buy it for convenience, and another third buy it because of the variety or the range that is otherwise unavailable. People who are actually selling only on the basis of discount, I would argue, have a shorter life than one would imagine. And that's a place where retailers actually could have an advantage, because we think that there is an online consumer, offline consumer, but the consumer is one. The offline online integration is something which will make the difference. So if we look at what are the set of things that one is talking about online digital behavior, these are the 5 characteristics which are important. Now add on to this something which is a unique phenomena which is happening around the theme of word of mouth. How many people in the room trust the government today? How many people in the room trusted the government 6 months back? How many people trust businesses or corporations? The fact is, study after study has shown that trust across the world is going down. Who do you believe? Your friends, your family, right? Whether it's related to purchasing something, whether it is figuring out which school your kids should go to, figuring out what doctor. Many people have always known that the most important parameter across categories, across countries is word of mouth. What do friends and families say? Advocacy is important. However, the big question always comes, what do you do about it? Because it's good to say friends and family, but is there something that can be done about it? What we've done is to actually create what we say a brand advocacy index. So you as a brand, you as a retailer can get to know how strong your brand is, not from the perspective of anything else, but from the fact that has somebody recommended your brand or not, and what are the reasons for the same. Interestingly, India, so we do the study across the world, across 16 countries, and India's is actually more advocacy conscious than any other market in the world. Part of it is driven by the fact that our media is less evolved than in some of these other markets. But if you look at category after category, advocacy is the single most important dimension, and retailers are the ones who actually have multiple touch points with the consumer, which is good and bad. It's good because it actually provides a point for you to create advocacy, reinforce advocacy. It is bad because it can also create negative advocacy. So what's the way forward? And there's some more data which I'm sure the team can share, the IRF team can share with you, which says across income segments, etc., it's actually an important phenomena. Now that's the first thing that I talked about, digital. The second, word of mouth. The important implication is, as you think about the time that you spent on social media, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and so on, the multiplier power of advocacy is increasing exponentially. Which comes to the third piece, which is the want all phenomena. BCG does a set of surveys around how the world shops. For the last 3 years, I have been having a consistent fight with my global counterparts in terms of saying, we need to change the questionnaire for India. And the reason is, this is how the questionnaire looks like. So we actually ask people on a set of dimensions about what do they like when they go on to a shop. Is it service, experience, product, pricing, access, convenience? And in every market in the world, you find that there is something important that people come up with. In India, India is the only market where in terms of when you ask the consumer actually wants everything, not willing to trade off on any of the dimensions that you see here. Okay? It's something which you don't see in the US, you don't see in Europe, you don't see in China. The only other country where you see elements of it is Indonesia. Right? Now, what does this result in? This results in the fact that the consumer finds different formats for serving different occasions. So what you see on the red here is where general trade, conventional trade is advantaged. What you see in the blue are the places where you have modern trade ranked on the same. So for different occasions, different formats actually deliver something differently. And that, if you look at where people consume, where people shop according to the frequency, the answer changes dramatically. Now, what does this all mean for retailers? So let me just try to bring it all together. Right? So we've talked about these three phenomena about digital being large, word of mouth being large, and consumers wanting it all. So is there a silver lining at the end of it for retailers? Because everything that I have said is talking about the world becoming more complex, the demand of the consumers becoming more complex. The silver lining is this. So I was having a discussion with Shivnath just before this session started. I said the comparison between India and China is meaningless, because for most companies, people actually have stopped thinking about India and China in the same breath. For good or for bad, we are in a league of our own. It's useful to look at China only from the perspective of, is there something which can be anticipated from what has happened in China? And there are people here who I'm sure have been to China and who would say China's infrastructure is 15, 20, 25, 30, pick a number, years ahead of India. Interestingly, on consumption, consumer, retail-led phenomena, the gap is closer to the 10-year period. And interestingly, the more premium you go, the gap increases. The more mass you go, the gap reduces. So if you look at soaps and detergents, actually the gap is less than a year. We are practically at the same levels. If you look at luxury cars, the gap is 12, 13 years. But on an average, we are at about 10 years. And what is it that has happened in China in each of these three? The first thing which has happened, which is unlikely to happen in India, is the lack of price discounting through somebody like Alibaba. So that's unlikely to happen because that game has already panned out. But the first piece is around digital to be looked at in an integrated manner. Most of the time that the discussion is on digital, it's around e-commerce, 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 e-commerce. The tough fact is that if offline retailers try to beat online retailers on their own game, that's not going to happen. So it's not only about commerce, it's about content, community, and how do you piece it all together. And I'm sure Deva is going to talk a bit more about it in the next session. But that's the first piece. The second is to looking at advocacy. And the good news is now there is a structured scientific way to both measure as well as act upon advocacy rather than being on the mercy of what's going to happen if I tell a friend. So how can that be done in a manner which is more structured and scientific? And the best news for all marketeers and all CFOs is the fact it is more measurable and the return is much better than conventional marketing. If we look at India's position from a perspective of the consumer who wants it all, conventional business, conventional consumer companies have always thought about consumer segmentation. I'm going to make a statement which is going to be provocative, which is to say consumer segmentation in today's time is useless. The same 32-year-old that I was talking about earlier who lives in Saharanpur, or the 20-year-old, actually at different times of the day, depending on who she or he is with, depending on the category that she or he is looking at, behaves very differently. So the archetype of saying this is an SEC A or SEC B housewife and this is how she is going to behave is outdated. The same consumer, forget people with the same demographics, the same consumer actually behaves differently. The same consumer, when he, and I'm being a bit gender biased here, decides to have alcohol, he may prefer something when he's at home with friends, he may prefer something else when he is out with colleagues, he may prefer something else when he's unwinding. So the concept of the consumer segmentation, I'm actually challenging. And if you transpose on that, the fact that there is so much difference in terms of what the consumer wants in terms of different occasions, India is probably the best place to have a truly multi-format piece together. And if you look at the retail densities which are there, the total number of Starbucks which are there in New York City, entire country of India has less than 5% of that. So we have a lot of retail density. The golden age of retailing, whether it happens on the main street, on the mall, or on your laptop or mobile, is there to come. And this country, this time period is probably the best time to be a retailer if you have a time horizon of more than 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiv. Thanks, Abhik. So I'm going to speak a little bit about omni-channel retail. And I've been asked to explain it a little bit, though it does seem most of you would know more than me. But does this seem familiar to most of you? Have you seen this happening in the real brick-and-mortar world because of the whole e-commerce phenomena? Well, what I'm here to say is that we are headed in this direction, but the headline message is stores are here to stay. And let me just share a couple of reasons why. As Abhik said, of course, pure play e-retailers have their own value proposition and they will make their own set of moves. But let's first see how the consumer is behaving in this whole digital space. The first, in terms of just going through the evolution. This is not India, by the way, right? We are still in this multi-channel phase from mono-channel. So mono-channel is where everybody is just individually specializing in their channels. Multi-channels, parts of it come together, but in different business entities, right? So your e-commerce venture is completely different, the inventory is different, the people are different, and so on and so forth. Similarly, call centers, teleselling, etc., everything is different. So omni-channel, at least as the buzzword says, should provide a unified view to the customer, right? But it is not happening in India. So while people say omni-channel, etc., at the back end, there are still differences. Let's just look at that as we go along. But without being overtly provocative or overtly predictive about it, let's at least see where have folks reached on this omni-channel journey, okay? So if you look at these 4 important criterion as far as customers are concerned, somebody like Nordstrom, in our opinion, provides the best unified view, right? It's a much abused jargon, but unified view is almost like a hotel experience where once they recognize you in the store, based on your offline behavior, they will recognize you and bring those sets of information, context, and sales propositions to you, whether it be past purchase, so on and so forth. We are quite far away from there, but this is at least where companies are attempting to go. It still doesn't mean that Nordstrom's backend is like totally seamless, but at least it's on the customer side. Buy online, pick up in store, you all have heard about it. But believe me, when a brick and mortar retailer wants to do it, the simple complexity around IT, supply chain, etc., just become very, very complex. But we would say Walmart is somebody who's done that successfully and across multiple countries. So if you want to study that, that's something you all should note down. Mobile applications, again, easier said than done. We've been reading about it for years and years, but there are very few retailers, brick and mortar. And when I'm using retailers, it's an omni-channel presentation, so I mean brick and mortar, so I'm not repeating that. Somebody like a Macy's or a Best Buy gives you the best productivity for your handle. So if you enter the store, you will know which zones are where, what kinds of discounts are going on, what kind of planograms are there, is that in stock, not in stock. And retailers don't even get their planograms online, so think about putting it on a mobile. So think about the challenges, right? And finally, integrated pricing and promotion. Frankly, if you ask me, I think the jury's out, even for the brick and mortar retailers, whether online should be a replica of the brick and mortar or it should fundamentally have a different proposition. Different proposition in terms of categories, in terms of pricing, promotions, and so on and so forth. But eventually, as we move towards survival of the fittest and not survival of the richest, at least we believe in A.T. Kearney, we will move to a greater degree of harmonization between what happens online and what happens at the brick and mortar, right? I mean, and we'll just talk about why that is happening from a customer perspective. So let me just talk about 3 customer trends and why it's new, right? The first is, we believe the Indian e-commerce market will be the fastest growing market globally in the next 5 years. It will grow at 60% plus, which is roughly double that of any other market, whether it's break, whether it's developed, and so on and so forth. So that's an important takeaway, because we are growing 3 to 4 times our GDP, that's not so important. But in the next 5 years, for investors and for people who are doing business, this is the market to be. There are several drivers, most of them are known, but I think the key point on this page is that our retail, our online sales as a percentage of our total sales are the lowest, and till that moves to 5%, after which in most markets you'll find a slowdown, and we are in that sweet spot. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, out of my 3 points I want to leave with you, is that Indian customers in this online space are behaving very, very close to the developed markets. So which means for you all that you have to carve your own journey, your path forward. I mean, you can't take benchmarks and you can't just see what folks are doing globally and try and replicate that in India. I mean, survey after survey, age group-wise spending. So it's a myth that 35 to 45-year-olds don't spend in India. That is absolutely wrong. They are spending as much and they are as active online, almost. Their digital age is a little lower, but they are almost as active as these 25 years old. And guess what? In 5 years, when these 25-year-olds become 30 years old and they're earning, we expect this market to just explode, right? And this is what a developed market looks like, right? Now, this is an Australian example, but I can tell you from the other examples we have in the developed markets is exactly that way. That the top 2 spenders are the young working age groups, 35 to 44 in rank 1, and then 25 to 34. In India, the 25 to 34, simply because the numbers are very large, that percentage is higher. But 50% of 35 to 44 urban population in India do online transactions. And believe me, it was far, far higher than what we thought those numbers would be, right? So the numbers are low. Why? As you will see on, I think on the previous page, because their percentage of spend is low. But it is absolutely right to say that people are behaving differently in different occasions. So sometimes they will buy something online, sometimes at a different format, sometimes for weekly shopping. So the predictability around that is low. So the implication for you is to have a very scalable and flexible business model. Please don't try and get into any kind of predictive behavior about what will happen. Be as close to the trend as possible so that you can modify your business models. And finally, stop predicting what categories will really work. Because frankly, nobody knows. If you see white papers from all the top consultancies, including ourselves, there were big theses about which categories will work and which won't work, and there were 5 reasons why something will work or not work. Across the world, that has been broken. Furniture is being sold, grocery is being sold, health and beauty is sold, albeit in different measures. But if you speak to the customers who are indulging in those commerce transactions, they're highly loyal. And that is what the brick and mortar folks have to start worrying about, because loyalty and then shifting of behavior because of the digital stickiness has its own implications, right? So just to summarize, we will grow the fastest amongst all the countries globally in the next 5 years. Number two, Indian consumers are behaving, I would almost say exactly the same or pretty close to what folks are doing in the developed world. So chart your own path. And the third is, don't predict categories. Look at your core competencies and what customers want and try and satisfy that proposition rather than just trying to be very theoretical about it. Now, let's just look at where does brick and mortar folks come in from an omni-channel perspective, right? There are two distinct advantages you must play on. So we have established the fact that you can't be outside this ocean, right? So you can't just be putting your feet into the water and saying, let me see. No. We are saying it is important enough, think about it. But the two things on which I think thinking is still being crystallized, the first is convenience. So if you see the first chart, it basically says, why are people going online? I think very similar to what you just heard in Abhik's presentation. And then why are people being hindered in online transactions? So convenience, so you speak to most brick and mortar retailers, they will say, oh, we can't do home delivery, we don't have people, and it's very difficult, there's that. I mean, there are 1,000 reasons, but we are saying, stop saying why it can't be done and why it needs to be done. India has been I always tell this to my clients, India has been the longest e-commerce market in the whole world. From telephones, from shouting at people, getting things at home. So, changing the shouting to phones and phones to online, our behavior hasn't changed. We still want things at home. So brick and mortar folks have to start thinking about it. The second is, how do you give the touch and feel value proposition to the client, to your customers, in a more tangible way, right? I mean, if he has to come to your shop, then that's like anyway visiting a brick and mortar or having a particular mission around that. And there are folks who are creating business models around giving flexibility for in-house trials and so on and so forth. I mean, you all probably know about those models. But the point is to think fast, pilot it quickly, and scale up, because you all can't afford to be out of this. But the fact is that even globally, even in the most e-commerce penetrated market, online is, I'm not going to use the word stagnating, but hovering around levels of 10 to 12%. And while I don't want to make a prediction, we have to basically see, are the customers who are looking for convenience and deals, what percentage of them at a macro level? Of course, I might buy a cheap shirt but have a very expensive phone, and I might have a very cheap phone and a very expensive shirt. So those behaviors are getting difficult to predict. But at a macro level, when you add up, you have to see where those numbers add up. And for your kinds of categories, that's what we would encourage all of you to do in India. And finally, even if your customers are not buying online, rest assured, a majority of them, this is a very urban-centric population, a majority of them are at least searching for you online. If you read some of the recent reports released by Google, your success is how do you get into that whole recommendation, word of mouth, and a credibility building process online through a neutral search. So if he's searching for you by brand, he's already made up his mind about you. So these first two digital behaviors is something, even if you are not focusing on e-commerce, you have to do. Improved digital engagement with the customers, and websites and all those are tactical things, but just basically having a very holistic touch points with the customers, right? And finally, you need to choose as a brick and mortar retailer, what are your strong points? We don't believe, because of that time window of 5 years, that survival of the richest is necessarily what you should pursue. It is going to be survival of the fittest. I mean, industry after industry, people will ask for profits at some point in time. And you need to choose between how people search for you, how people order, and where do they want serviced, both in terms of products and service. And I mean, I'm not getting very theoretical around this. And you have to make this work profitability. We believe online has a profitable business model if it is executed in the right way and consistent with your brick and mortar format. So I'll just leave it at that. And the last thing is, think about your organization structure. When all of us talk about it, 99% of my time I've only talked about customers. But we should also think about what will it take from your organization's perspective to really create that unified view so that you can deliver that proposition. So it's not just at the store or in the virtual world, but the whole system gearing up to meet that proposition. So let me stop at that. I think we're anyway out of time. Shiv, I'll leave it to you whether you would like to have Q&A or not. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we have some time for Q&A, because also thanks so much, Devashish, for your presentation. We do have some time for Q&A, so I believe whoever has questions, just go to the mic there, which is right behind you. So you can just go up to the mic there. Two key takeaways, if I can just, the thing which kind of stayed in my head from Abhik's one slide is that if you want to look at India, China, we are about 7 to 10 years behind from a retail consumption boom. No wonder we are calling it the retail renaissance in this session. And from Debashish's point, survival of the richest versus survival of the fittest. So in ways, it's a kind of a below-the-belt hit to all the valuation stories that we hear. But we have a few questions which we can take. Go ahead. And if you can address it to the person who you're asking.
Louis-Michel Barbotin, a Smart World Shopper. I'm challenging the omni-channel perspective because I would more talk and look into the omni-shopper perspective. Because what does omni-channel mean? It means the ability for a retailer to develop a new way to do his business. It's like when Mercedes decided to go into small cars. We know that for many years it was not a very big success. So their ability eventually go from big to small cars were their ability to reach into a different market. From the other point of view, the omni-shopper is the ability to actually shop in a different format. And because of the familiarity with the online, I'm more confident in the speed of the shoppers because of this curiosity, women's curiosity, men's as well, to go and look in a different format to buy and acquire something that they want. So one side is the business standpoint and the ability to develop a new format in doing business. And we know that a lot of retailers are doing it, tempted to do it. I'm not sure I've seen the right business model to come out yet. But the other way around is to make sure that from the shopper's point of view, they can reach out to different channels, including obviously online and all the others that you've mentioned, in the best way. And to support this, when I looked around the world, out of 1,000 clicks, and your numbers reflect those numbers, between 850 and 900 of the clicks is search, and only 100 to 150 is purchase. So my concern and the understanding of the new model coming out is really understanding what is happening during those 900 clicks, what is a search, where not purchase is actually performed, to understand at one point and on which criteria they will actually go to one channel rather than another.
So, in a way, go ahead, challenging your premise on omni-retail.
Sure. Louis, thanks for your question. Our view on this is very simple. While all the facts you bring to the table are fair, and I would agree with them, if a brick-and-mortar retailer creates this, as I initially said, as a multi-channel, which is a different business. So if Mercedes is making a small car, it is moving out of its core business. I don't want to say whether that should be or should not be successful, but general common sense says that's a different business, which will have its own set of success factors. Our view is brick-and-mortar guys, from the point of view of the brick-and-mortar brand and customer franchise, should stick to that. That will test customer loyalty. I agree with you. But that's exactly the point of this evolution. So if nobody wants to go to your shop, which I personally research and personally I believe would be a cynical view, there are folks who will, sorry, the person is coming in between you. No, that's fine. Who will stick to even brick-and-mortar formats because the interplay between shopping in the store and booking on the internet, or looking on the internet and booking in the store, I think this interplay is far too complex for us to try and entangle in a very exclusive manner, in a mutually exclusive manner. So what it boils down to is the customer. Are you engaging with him in the manner he wants? Because brands are an important part of our lives. Let's not forget it. And then there are private labels. So now I'm getting into level 2, level 3 arguments about what that whole customer franchise is and why he will need to come to you. And you need to start improving on those propositions based on what other brick-and-mortar competitors have and what e-tailers have. But in short, what I'm saying is, if the brick-and-mortar guys don't stick close to their own core in terms of what they're offering to the customer, there will be too many things to too many people. And our own humble view, as I said, last thing we want to be is predictive, is that the chances of success are different. And at least I will say right now, globally, the performance shows that way. The e-tailers are dealing with a different set of customers, with a different kind of demographics and psychographics to some extent, and what's happening in the e-tail. But let's see what the future holds. Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be an offline opportunity for Louis and you to interact. Yes, so you have a question. Keep the question short, and if you can introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My questions to both the speaker. For the startup who wants to come into e-commerce space, is any scientific way available to calculate ROI? Is the benchmark available in the industry? And what is the time horizon one should keep to reach to that benchmark? Thanks.
Quickly, Abhik, you want to have a first go at it, and then probably Devashish can come.
So, very quick answer. I think e-commerce is a rapidly evolving industry. I don't think there are, standard benchmarks in terms of saying, this will happen. It's a rapidly evolving industry. Obviously, ROI is an important measure. My own personal belief is that if you are not able to reach the two benchmarks that I would look, or the two metrics I would look as an investor, is are you getting customer stickiness? And second, from an operation perspective, at a gross margin, contribution, whatever level, is there line of sight to money? Those are the two things that I would look at.
Devashish?
Yeah, so while there are no benchmarks, you have to create your own benchmarks. I think the short answer is it is possible to be profitable in e-commerce, provided you have the right proposition. I'm not getting into super detail about it. My personal view is every business, at least in retail, should be profitable in 2 years. And e-commerce allows you to be scalable. So I'm putting a view out there. Because it's changing so fast. If you have a 4-year plan, who will sign up for that?
Yeah.
So if you can't show money in, see, a normal store breaks even in 12 months, maximum 18 months, if it has the right set of parameters, right? So why would it be very difficult different in e-commerce, given it's more scalable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
There is no benchmark available.
A way to look at it? No, there's no benchmark in, why in India, even globally? I mean, some of the biggies are still making losses.
Amazon, continues to operate at wafer-thin margins even after 20 plus years. So, and benchmarks are, like somebody said, there are three kinds of lies, white lies, and statistics. So benchmarks can be used any which way.
So the best part about the next 2 days will be that you may not get any clear answers, but you will get the maximum knowledge that exists out there, from what I understand. You have to go by some existing examples that we are setting up.
What I will add, Shiv, sorry to interrupt you, is globally, the work we've done for Omni-channel folks globally, those channels are as profitable. So the folks who have 10-12% of their business coming from pure online, they've ensured it's profitable. So they are not taking losses on this like some of the other folks.
But I'm glad the first session has started off by asking you a question as to how do I become profitable in the online world. But thank you so much, Devashish and Abhik, for joining us for this curtain raiser. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for them, setting the ball rolling on the 2 exciting days of the retail renaissance. Optimistic after these 2 speakers. Thank you guys for joining us, and hope to see you next year, if not earlier. Thanks so much, Devashish.